Welcome everybody from all around the world to uncertain times, quite extraordinary times that we're facing. My name is Matt Symonds. I'm one of the co-directors at Fortuna Admissions. I'm joined by other co-directors from Fortuna. We wanted to perhaps provide some sense to everything that is happening for current graduates of the world's top business schools, those that applied this year for business school, and those that are looking to apply in the future. So I think that the next 60 minutes are going to be filled with your questions. We've already received many questions from you, and there is a Q&A option for you to share those questions about where you're at with your business school plans and how Covid-19 is turning everything up on its head. I'm able to draw from the shared insider admissions experience of my colleagues at Fortuna. We have close to 40 former associate deans, admissions directors, associate directors, who, as they will explain themselves, have faced other crises, perhaps not quite like this one. But as we go back to the dot-com bubble of 2001 or the collapse of Lehman Brothers and the financial crisis 11, 12 years ago, and the impact that that had on graduating students and then the next generations that applied to business school. So let me share with you my fellow panelists. I'm joined by Bill Kooser. Bill has a long and distinguished career. He was at Chicago Booth for close to 30 years in two distinct parts of his career, helping Booth to expand their international footprint to Asia and to Europe. I'm joined by Caroline Diarte Edwards, who was herself an INSEAD MBA and was then the Director of Admissions at INSEAD for 7 years. Caroline was also the Director of Financial Aid, and I know that we had one or two questions about scholarships, so I'm sure that she'll have great insights to share. And Judith Silverman Hodara. Judith was at the Wharton School in Philadelphia for 11 years. She was the acting director of admissions at the school and went through many of these crises. I describe this as uncertain times. It's quite extraordinary. You've seen a few crises come and go, but perhaps nothing quite like this, right?
I would definitely agree. Hi, everybody. We're so glad that you're able to join us today. And this one obviously is pretty unprecedented, but we definitely know that from looking at the application cycles that this could possibly mimic what we've been seeing before. So we know that there are a lot of questions out there about should I or shouldn't I? If I'm already in, should I go? If I'm not from the US, what is happening? We know that the schools are in actually terrific communication with everybody. And certainly for those of you that are contemplating graduation and what happens next, there's a lot to be talked about around those questions as well. So we're really delighted to have the opportunity to do that with you today.
Great. Bill, you've seen financial crises, you've seen technology busts. This looks a little different, the time frame as well.
That's exactly right, as you said, Matt, and welcome to everyone. Glad you could be here with us. As Matt had said, I spent nearly 30 years at Chicago Booth in a variety of roles, admissions, career services, international, and have lived through financial crises, downturns in the market, 9/11, and the SARS crisis, and we had to deal with each one of those. And all were dramatically difficult for the schools and the students involved. But all of them also at the time seemed to, even as we were getting into them, seemed to be of shorter duration than this one might be. So although there's some similarities, and I think a lot of lessons we can learn from what the schools have gone through in the past and how the markets had responded and how students responded to those issues, this one has some new challenges as well that we're going to have to be creative about. Helping you think through your applications, prepare yourselves for what the next few years might look like, and to all of us work very, very closely with the schools to help them deal with the challenges that they're facing to make sure that your experience there is the best it can be.
Caroline, you were the gatekeeper at INSEAD that of course describes itself as the business school for the world, with its campuses in Europe, in Singapore, in Abu Dhabi, and now a new campus in San Francisco. that view on the world is.
I'm losing you a little bit, Matt.
Okay, so Caroline, do you want to just sort of talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, INSEAD, in many ways, you know, the international diversity and the international community is a huge strength for the school. And, you know, my experience of going through, you know, the ups and downs of economic cycles whilst working at INSEAD was that, you know, on one hand, you know, it's a very trying time for students who are coming in, and, you know, you don't know what market you're going to be graduating into, and sometimes, you know, students come into the school and the economy is fantastic, and, you know, they're very excited about you know, all the opportunities that are going to be raining down on them when they graduate, and then, you know, they have a nasty shock. And, you know, many students are going to be in that situation right now, and you know, so that's been you know, an experience that schools have been through many times. I would say, you know, one advantage that INSEAD has, at least from an economic perspective and for graduating students, is that the school feeds graduating candidates or graduating students into about 60 different countries around the world. So, you know, when I was working at INSEAD and there was a downturn in the economy, and companies in London or New York or, you know, certain markets were cutting back on recruitment, there were other markets where recruitment was still stronger. And so, you know, that helps to cushion the impact somewhat on the graduating class, that there may be, you know, reductions in opportunities in certain markets, but that sometimes can switch to other markets. So, you know, that's something that I think is an advantage in many ways for the international schools.
Right. Now, of course, INSEAD among the top schools is perhaps unusual, given that it has 2 class entries. So we'll be coming back, I think, Caroline, to both those that are looking for admission in the fall, whether at a top US or an international school, but also a January class start of 2021, and what INSEAD, Wharton, Booth, and other schools are doing to accommodate. So we thought that there were perhaps 3 stakeholder groups that we would really try to address. And later on in the webinar, we will be talking about those that are in the application process, either for September or for January 2021, and all of the questions that they have about taking GMAT when test centers are closed, providing transcripts if their universities aren't responsive, the impact maybe on scholarships, deferrals. And this is a work in process. On the Fortuna website, we have a COVID-19 updated blog that has all of the input and the latest news from the top schools and the decisions that they're making, extended deadlines. And we'll also then be talking about those of you thinking about perhaps applying next year. Historically, we've always seen that during those downturns, the applications to business school rise. What might that mean for you? Should you be part of that pool? Should you be rushing to get in a round 3 or a round 4 application in the next month or 2? But we're going to start with, of course, those that are just graduating. The class of 2020, which sadly we may come to remember as the class of COVID-19, they face a very difficult and a very uncertain job market. Bill, if I can start with you, just in terms of, you know, the enduring value of the MBA. This is a big moment for them, and, you know, we feel very sorry that they will miss that moment of graduation with their classmates that they've been spending the last year or 2 with. How do the schools now support their graduates as they come into a difficult job market?
Well, as we said earlier, Matt, schools have faced similar issues in the past, and it's to the school's benefit to make sure that all graduating students are well supported. And so they will be bending over backwards to make sure that they do everything they can to provide the connections and the support and the opportunities to get your careers launched on the right foot. And there are going to be some challenges. I saw earlier today that I think JP Morgan has put a freeze on hiring. I don't know if that means MBA hiring or other hiring, but the schools will rally their alumni base. They will be twisting arms amongst their corporate recruiting partners. They will be working very closely with students to identify backup alternatives and plans. And they will be giving their graduating students opportunities and ideas on how to negotiate through this challenging time. And in many cases, it will be a conversation you might have with an employer that has already extended an offer to you, and working very closely with them to understand what their plans are, what their view of the future might be. So I'm actually fairly confident that graduating students this year, although it won't be easy, will be very, very well supported by the schools. And clearly the skills that you have developed and the connections that you have made over the course of the last year and a half will serve you well, regardless of what happens in the next 3 months, 4 months, 5 months. And that the investment that you've made in your MBA studies will, in the long run, be very, very, a very, very good investment of your time and financial resources, regardless of what happens over the short run.
Right. Judith, Bill makes the point about sort of looking at the ROI of business school over a longer time frame, and not just immediately what happens as you come out of schools. As you think back to Lehman Brothers and the financial crisis, I mean, Wharton was placing anywhere between 47, 51% of the class into financial services. If you looked at the makeup of the graduating class a couple of years later, they were placing incredible numbers at the consulting firms. Tech was emerging as a big employer. So as you take a longer term view, do you have words of comfort for this class of 2020?
I do, and I remember that day. I remember the Lehman Brothers day. I'm sure we all do, and we all looked at each other like, what just happened? And there was this real sense of sorrow because we cared so much about our students. And I think that anybody that's in this field really has a deep sense of connection to the students that they've gotten to know through the admissions process, bringing them through the culture of the school, sharing the community with them. And there's no doubt that that long-term view of that alumni relationship, of looking for other industries. And you're right. I mean, if you look at, as you said, the sort of the waves of where students were going, from finance into consulting into tech, and Wharton has done an awful lot, which we'll talk about a little later, around entrepreneurship, and I think has sort of always pushing out to see, okay, we've been known for finance since the 1880s. What is it that we're going to be known for next and next and next? And I think that all the schools are really trying to get away from sort of the catch-all phrase that sometimes students like to associate with them. Oh, Wharton is finance and Harvard is this and Stanford is this. So I certainly feel like the students that are coming out, and this is certainly going to be a rough year, there's no doubt, but that thinking about using those networks and those resources, and the schools, I really think go to bat 150%, even more so than they do under normal circumstances. And we have a lot of people that have worked in career services and career management on our team. And I've talked to them about this feeling of just really, collectively helping the folks that are graduating and figuring out what's going to be happening next. So right. I can't say that people all of a sudden started dropping out of banking because those jobs weren't there. I just think that they were expanding their field of interest and maybe finding other ways to get into their industry. And right. Again, long-term view, no doubt that alumni network, those relationships are incredibly important, regardless of, as I said, the next 5 or 6 months.
Right, Caroline, INSEAD, among other schools, have been very swift to shift classes online, of course, with the social distancing that has been put into place, cities that are in lockdown, campuses that have closed. I mean, the career support doesn't stop with graduation, right? We've talked about the networks, of course, that you're part of. And I think at INSEAD, there were close to 40 members of the career services team in Fontainebleau alone. They're going to continue to support these students through this difficult time.
Yeah, I mean, the school has built up and invested a lot in the careers team over the last few years. And just a couple of things to add to what you're saying. So when recruiters, and what we've seen in the past is when, there's a reduction in recruitment for MBAs, what a lot of the firms will do is, when times are good, they'll be going to recruit at 20, 30 schools. When times are bad, they will cut that list back, and maybe they're going to recruit at 5 or 10 schools. So, recruitment will remain stronger at the top schools. And I think, in difficult times, the value of going to a top business school is even greater, and just sort of underlines the importance of you know, the value of that top MBA program for those, you know, from a recruitment perspective. And another thing, I mean, just building on what Judith was saying, you know, students can get in a panic about, you know, my job offer has been rescinded, or, you know, maybe I'm not going to land that, my plan A career path straight away. But what we've seen many times, you know, both while I was working at the school and then since then with people we've worked with at Fortuna, is that, you know, sometimes plan A doesn't work out straight away, but there are different ways to reach your you know, your medium to longer term goal. Mm-hmm. And people often are able to achieve career change through a number of steps rather than just one step. So it may be that, you know, you're looking to come out of business school and jump straight into, you know, a very different job from the one that you had before business school. Right. Well, what may happen is that it takes you, you know, a couple of steps to get to that point. It doesn't mean that the door closes entirely. And also what I've seen is that, you know, people coming out during difficult times, you know, they do something else. And often, you know, entrepreneurs have launched businesses out of business school and, you know, done that in difficult years when, you know, they didn't have the fantastic offer from McKinsey or Goldman. And so they decided to launch their own business and have taken that risk because the stakes seemed lower at that time. And it's gone tremendously well. So, you know, I would, as you said, I would encourage candidates and students to take a long-term perspective and not to panic about, you know, what's going to happen to me the short term. And yes, I mean, as you said, the schools will all be looking to support, you know, the admits, the students, the graduates through this process. And you know, the schools have tremendously, you know, huge experience in coaching students and graduates with their career plans and helping them figure out plan B, plan C, and, you know, really care, as we've said, about, you know, their graduates and their students and helping them, you know, do everything they can. And I'm sure, you know, these teams are working incredibly hard right now to, you know, as Bill said, twist some arms and, you know, just do everything they can to reach out and work those networks that they have and, you know, those long-term relationships that they have built over the years with recruiters in many different markets. And that will be, you know, bearing fruit now for the schools, because, you know, they'll be counting on the, you know, the benefits of having those long-term relationships with recruiters.
Right. Matt, one other thing, if I could, one other thing, if I could jump in, is that to recognize that most of the top schools also provide great support to their alumni from a career services standpoint. And so coming back to well, maybe my plan A isn't going to work right now, but I'll go to B, which may eventually get me to A. But working with the schools once you're out, you know, a year from now, 2 years, 5 years from now, can also be very helpful as you think about your longer term career aspects and where you might take your degree.
Great. Now we have questions that are coming in for those that are, you know, thinking of applying to business school, whether for round 3 or for January in 2021. So we'll be looking to address all of the questions. I wanted now to turn our attention to those that have already applied, and Judith, bring you in the enormous challenge that admissions offices face, whether the M7 and beyond, in terms of yield management. You've always talked to me about the joy of crafting the diversity of next year's class, and as you'd see, you know, strong applicants in round 1, perhaps some you'd put on the wait list, and then there was the round 2 pool. All of the uncertainties that we now face. So perhaps you can talk us through, you know, round 1, maybe you're on the wait list. Round 2, you've been navigating virtual interviews by Skype, or Wharton organizing team-based discussions using the Zoom platform. Schools making offers and being uncertain that, you know, embassies will be able to deliver the visas. In fact, Harvard Business School has just sent a letter of support to all of their international admits to say, you know, we really want you as part of our class. So can you talk us through some of the dynamics and therefore some of the decision-making challenges that the admissions offices are facing right now?
I'd be happy to. I think that the visa question has been really different in different times of application history. And on a normal year, it was fairly typical while I was at Wharton not to admit in round 3. I mean, round 3 was so hard to begin with. There were not a lot of international admits at that point because it was really hard to guarantee that they were going to be able to get there in time. Wharton, as a lot of other schools, do start kind of early, beginning of August. And if you kind of back that up, you need to be in the US about a week earlier, or maybe even 2 weeks. And so we would sort of run this clock and figure out where we were and could we risk it for a round 3 admit? We also would start to get a sense from from everybody else what their visa situations were. Admittedly, there, depending on world events, sometimes there were hiccups on specific regions of the world, and we got pretty used to that. I think all of us in the M7 believe that the schools are going to look to keep their wait lists pretty fat going into the summer. And that may mean, and I used to hate this personally because I thought it was really unfair for applicants who sort of might have deposited one place and didn't know if they were off the wait list somewhere else. And so you sort of have this torn, loyalty one way or the other. I think that schools would be wise to do that, not, just because of the uncertainty. Do I think that they're going to change? They're going to change sort of who they want in their class? I don't think that they're going to all of a sudden decide that the gates are wide open. I think that the schools, and I think Bill probably from the US perspective would share that with me, that schools are going to maintain their standards and their expectations. I just think that they might protect themselves a little bit more than they had done previously. The goal at Wharton, and I'm supposing at Chicago as well, schools didn't really like to release their wait list numbers. I mean, that's the biggest question I ever get over the summer is how many people are on the wait list, that magic number. And I would tell you that Wharton really wanted to keep theirs light. They sort of felt like we should allow individuals to go out and either find another school or reapply. I do not think that's going to be the case this year. I don't know if Bill has comments on that.
Well, I would agree with you, Judith. I think the wait lists have to be, as you say, fatter this year. The uncertainty is just so great. And the schools don't want to miss their numbers if they can at all avoid it. I mean, you have a target number of students you want in your class, and as admissions directors, we all know that number is fairly important for the future of the school, the health of the school. So I'm sure they will have large wait lists. I agree with you that an international applicant trying to come in round 3 is likely to not get a favorable response. I just think it's too hard. There's too many uncertainties around visas at this point. When I was at Booth, we didn't even really encourage international applicants in normal times to apply round 3. It was just too difficult to get the visas. And over the last 4 or 5 years, that's been even harder. So I think large wait lists are likely this year. A lot of indecision until we get into late June, July, and maybe even beyond that, depending how the whole pandemic pans out.
So if I can sort of dive into that round 3 scenario, because as both of you have described, and of course Harvard Business School dropped round 3 a couple of years ago and decided to set it aside just for the 2+2 applicants applying as seniors in college. And they have said that they continue to welcome those applications, of course, and have even, for a number of schools, extended the deadlines that they will work with. But typically round 3 for the top schools was perhaps filling a few gaps, some diversity profiles that you may not have seen in rounds 1 and round 2. Is that going to open up? Perhaps even to your point about applicants, US applicants that won't face the issues of visa, they might want to consider throwing their hat in the ring, assuming that they've got a GMAT score or a GRE score, because this other reality, while GRE has now announced that they will enable home testing, GMAC, which is also looking at that option, that's not something that they would consider until mid-April, which will probably take us beyond many of those round 3 deadlines. So as schools accommodate, and Caroline, I wanted to come to you later on for the specifics of INSEAD working on 2 class entries and their decision around the GMAT. But is round 3 going to be a good shot? And if you're working in oil and gas, where oil is now worth, what, $23 a barrel?
Yeah.
Or you're in financial markets and saying, where's my annual bonus coming from at the end of the year?
Right.
Will we actually see a number of applicants, not just with the M7, but beyond, to the S7, to the top 20 US schools, rush to try to fill those places for September? Bill, what do you think?
Well, I guess I have a couple of thoughts. One, I think a lot of schools, and certainly at Booth, a large chunk of their class will have come from the first couple of deadlines and not the third.
Mm-hmm.
The uncertainties around how many of those students are going to accept the offer of admission. So as we say, I think there will probably be more admitted students coming off the round 3 deadline, but at the M7 schools, for sure, the number of applications, the number of great applicants to all of these schools is so large that the schools can still be fairly selective, in fact, very selective in what they're going to do. So although I think there may be interesting opportunities for a potential round 3 applicant, it shouldn't just be a matter of, oh, I think I'll take the next couple of days and quickly throw together an application and throw it into the mix. If you've thought about this, if you have a good story to tell, if this makes sense for you over the long term and you have begun some of the work, then a round 3 application could be done, and as long as it's done well, could be a very beneficial strategy. But I would caution against just kind of throwing an application out there just for the heck of throwing an application in the mix, because the selectivity is still very, very high, and it won't be viewed all that positively if it's not a well-done application.
Right, and Judith, you have spoken with many potential last-minute applicants, and that's that same sort of, the quality needs to be there, irrespective of round 3, and in many cases, perhaps it would be smarter to target round 1.
Very much so, and it's hard because I think that people are home, they have time, but having time doesn't necessarily mean that you're ready. So you sort of have the luxury, let's just say you've got 4 weeks, 5 weeks. But it still is a mindset that is a process. We work with a lot of our students at Fortuna for 9 months, 6 months. And so it's an evolution, right? So it doesn't just happen like, oh, I'm going to sit down and this is going to be my story. It takes time. And I think time under pressure is very different than time to really be thoughtful and reflective. Right. And I hate to tell people that, because round 3 seems like, oh, the schools are opening up. This is great. But I had a conversation on Friday, and I think at the end of the discussion, the young woman was like, yeah, I get it. Like, I have this great idea, but it's really half-baked. And why would I throw a dart at it and just kind of see what happens? I'd rather wait. I'm going to call you, in June, and let's do this properly.
Right.
So
that also implies the recommenders that they want to bring in.
Sure.
Themselves are facing, the challenge of working from home and the schedules that we've all needed to shift to. That could present its own problems too.
Without a doubt, and you are asking a lot of people to come in under unusual pressures to support you. So I definitely think it's a terrific idea to talk to your recommenders and get them on board for your eventual application. But I really don't feel like pressing the button at this point just because you have a couple of weeks, let's just say optimistically, where you've got more time than usual is a great way to kind of push towards round 3. I really say start thinking about round 1 and then put your energy towards that instead.
Right. Caroline, from a European business school perspective, where often those deadlines run a little later into the spring, London Business School has a round 4 deadline on April the 22nd, and the likes of INSEAD, HEC, Rotterdam, a number of schools that have a January class start option. Can you talk us through what you're seeing and also how the schools are trying to accommodate with the ability to take a GMAT anytime soon? So what are you seeing from INSEAD and other schools?
Yeah, so the schools are trying to be flexible where they can. And so INSEAD and London Business School have announced that, you can submit an application without a test score. So if you haven't been able to take the GMAT or the GRE, then submit your application, and that they hope that you'll be able to take the test soon. And if test centers reopen, or perhaps these online tests will become available. So it doesn't mean necessarily that they're waiving the test requirements entirely, but it's more sort of postponing the test because they understand the circumstances. So look, I mean, the situation is changing day by day. The schools are doing their best to keep on top of things, and they're They're, trying to be as flexible as possible. It's a very difficult situation for the schools, as we've said. Trying to predict yield right now for incoming classes must be an absolute nightmare. My heart goes out to the schools on this, because it's a hard enough job as it is without, this unprecedented crisis. And so, schools will, are encouraging people to apply. It's great to have that flexibility with the European schools, that you can apply for later rounds. So, as we've said, if you're ready, if now is the right time for you, taking a longer term view, not just jumping in now because you have some extra time on your hands, but was this, is this the right step for you? Then go ahead. And, if you've got some, if you can take advantage of this time to put the final touches on your application, or dedicate a bit more time to the admissions process, that's great. But if it's the right step for you at this point in your career. And I would say that admissions directors see in final rounds that there's often the most variable quality. So in every round you have great candidates, but you get there's always, in a final round, there's a whole batch of candidates who've thrown together the application at the last minute, and for some reason that's just much more apparent in a final round than other rounds. And I guess there are some candidates who've procrastinated and they can't put it off any longer, and it's now or never. So I think there's going to be more of that happening right now, with people, as you say, throwing their head into the ring for later rounds. So so if you are submitting an application, just really do it properly, because schools will be separating the wheat from the chaff in these rounds, and seeing if it's a well prepared application, if it's a well thought through application, or if it's something that has been thrown together in crisis mode at the last minute.
Right. Now I'm going to draw on some of the very specific, some excellent questions that we received both prior to the webinar, and that people are now sharing on the Q&A. Do use that Q&A function, and if we don't get to all of those questions in today's webinar, we will try to follow up with all of you to provide those informed responses. A couple, Caroline, that are specific for schools like INSEAD and conditions with the GMAT. I was asked, you've often commented, you were 7 years as the admissions director at the school and would see the ebbs and flows of applicant volumes in round 1, 2, 3, and 4. One of our viewers asked, would it still be smarter for this person to apply in round 2 and give themselves more time for the GMAT, perhaps prepare that test in June, given that the school is accepting scores? So would you still recommend sending in the application itself earlier, rather than waiting, taking the GMAT when they can, and applying in a later round?
Right. Yeah. So I would say, don't worry too much about the test right now. If the rest of your application is ready, and if you feel that you've had the time you need to think things through, and your whole package is ready to go, and your recommenders are lined up and so on, then I would go ahead and submit. And the schools are genuinely being flexible on the testing requirements, and they're not going to count it against you. They completely understand people's circumstances. So I would I think that the classic advice of apply when you're ready is still absolutely valid. In the past, of course, the GMAT or the GRE would have been part of that package, but these are extraordinary circumstances, and so the schools are being as flexible as they can, and they will be looking at they'll be spending more time looking at your undergraduate transcript. Maybe you've taken a test in the past that, maybe you've got an out-of-date GMAT or GRE, and why not submit that as well? It's all evidence of your academic ability. Some other schools are accepting, looking at some other tests as well in the US market, SAT and so on. So I would say, just submit when you're ready, and likely these online tests will come into play in the near future. And so, hopefully there will be options for you to take the test, so that the school will be able to give you a firm decision, sooner rather than later.
And given that in the early parts of the year, there are typically as many as 10,000 Chinese GMAT test takers every month, there will be a lot of pent-up demand for those tests taken from home. Somebody's actually asked, do you think that the fact that we can take a GMAT at home will push scores up? I don't know if we'll be sitting there with a cup of tea and feeling very relaxed taking our GMAT, if that will change things.
That's really interesting psychologically. I heard an interview yesterday with a well-known American TV personality, Terry Gross from NPR, and she was recording from home. And the person she was interviewing said, "You sound so relaxed. You sound like you're really in your element." So maybe it's the same thing, you know, like you're comfortable, it's not so stressy. So I like that idea a lot.
Even in a regular year, and Bill and Judith, a question for you. The GMAT or the GRE already, one of these components that people worry about securing competitive scores. There are other ways, of course, to demonstrate. Caroline touched on some of them. One of our, would it be a good time to take the HBS online course to show that I've taken some quant courses or, transcripts? So, your advice, whether if testing centers are closed or there's a big backlog on the tests, or, you're struggling with a lower score, perhaps than the school averages, there are ways to mitigate that, right?
Yeah, of course. And we would regularly at Booth suggest to candidates who may have had lower scores or didn't have a lot of evidence of quantitative ability in their undergraduate transcripts to take a course in statistics or accounting or calculus at a local community college or online, or do something as you suggested, the HBS programs, just to give an indication that, yes, I am comfortable dealing with quantitative subject matter. So that is certainly one way to demonstrate you have some academic ability in that field, which is one of the things that many schools will be most concerned about, because they don't want you kind of getting into the classroom and freezing when they start putting equations on the blackboard.
Right. Now, before we move to that final group of those looking to apply in the months and year or two ahead, we're getting quite a few questions that what will it be like? Will we suddenly see, next year that great numbers of people will be applying to business schools? So I'd like to tackle those, but there is one final question that I think was recurrent for those looking at offers for September. With the current uncertainty, schools, as we've seen, have finished their academic years with online courses, and we don't know how long the lockdowns and the disruption that COVID-19 is generating around the world will continue. So naturally, people are wondering what their options might be in terms of deferring. No school has gone on the record, to the best of my knowledge, to talk about a deferral policy. Clearly, they thought that you had the caliber and the quality to join this year's class. What are your thoughts, all three of you? I know that it's very difficult to predict, but if either candidates approach the school to ask for a deferral, or what we might see perhaps later in the summer. That's a difficult question. Who wants to start?
Nobody wants to take that one. So we did talk about that a little bit earlier, Matt, before we launched into the call. And schools are pretty hesitant, in my experience, to defer for any reason other than a medical situation, caring for yourself, caring for a family member. On occasion, if someone had a very specific opportunity that was never going to be repeated and they absolutely had to take it, and something related, I can think of some examples, but something that was like once in a lifetime. I've been asked to go to the moon, so I'm going to go to business school in 2 years, kind of thing. But there was really not any other reason. And we would frequently have people say, okay, then I'll apply again. I'll come back in a year. So I'm going to throw it back to my colleagues because we were chatting about that. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. I would agree with that, Judith, obviously. And the other thing that we touched on when we were talking earlier is that given the challenges of this particular issue, the COVID-19, and the challenges of getting visas for international students, the schools may be more receptive to granting deferrals for international students because they can't get a visa. Not because they don't want to come, but because, hey, I can't get into the consulate to talk to anybody to get the paperwork started. They may be more receptive to that. I think it's unlikely although we certainly don't know yet. I think it's unlikely that they will be a blanket, we're going to defer anybody that wants to defer. I just think that's not, that doesn't bode well for the schools. And frankly, I don't think it's great for the students either, because who knows how long that might last. So my guess is it'll still be case by case. If there is a strong reason you cannot make it to the school, can't get a visa as an example, I think there is likely to be good probability that you'll get a deferral.
And perhaps in those cases, Bill, they will encourage those individuals that, for those reasons of a visa, to apply next year, which is going to come up in our discussion about how selective the coming year will be in terms of volumes, right?
Right. Yeah. So whether they say reapply for next year or whether they will grant the deferral and give them a guaranteed spot for next year, again, we don't know. Could go either way.
Right.
My own sense is from my Muth experience is that it probably be more likely to have at least some deferrals, again, for the specific reason that I can't get into the embassy or the consulate to get my visa.
Yeah. Caroline, any thoughts for also, you know, an INSEAD that has 2 class entries and a dean right now that is, you know, tested positive for COVID-19, and we hear making a strong recovery, which is good to hear. But this is very close to home.
Yes, it is. Yeah, so deferrals, you know, it's similar. I think, you know, it's going to be a similar situation. INSEAD does not like granting deferrals, and you know, similar criteria to what Judith mentioned. You know, also I would occasionally grant deferrals if someone couldn't get their financing together, and with such a sort of international population as INSEAD, where, you know, for certain nationalities it can be quite difficult to mobilize your financing. Then that would sometimes be a reason for granting a deferral as well. So look, I'm sure there are going to be more deferrals than normal, but normally there are very few deferrals indeed. And you know, the schools will be trying to work with candidates, but they're going to have to, you know, strike a fine balance. And there's going to be, you know, they're going to have to be quite firm with some people. And they will grant some deferrals where, you know, people have a really good argument and they're just not going to be able to attend the school, and they will, you know, they will understand that. I would also say that, you know, to all candidates and admits that, you know, just be patient as well, because I'm sure that the schools right now are completely overwhelmed with communication from everyone who is, you know, in a panic about what's going to happen, and, you know, whether they should attend the school or not attend the school, when is the right time to apply, you know, what do I do if I haven't got my GMAT test, and when are you going to, you know, lots of different scenarios that people are worrying about. And the admissions team and all of the staff at these schools are overwhelmed, and so just be patient. If you can, just hold off on contacting the school, and just, you know, if they don't get back to you straight away, just you know, cut them some slack, because they're in a very difficult situation right now, and you know, managing things day by day, and you know, they want to do the best for the school and the best for the community and the best for their students, and you know, they're figuring out the best way of doing that.
Right, and it goes both ways. You know, we know the admissions officers are fully aware of different candidate situations. We have clients from round 1 accepted, they got their acceptance in December. They then chose to leave their current position, went on a great geographic adventure, which obviously was curtailed, and are wondering what they're going to do for the next 6-7 months. So it's unprecedented. I think that line of communication with the schools, you know, if you're an admit or placed on a wait list, there will be a high volume of questions, but they will certainly want to respond to those questions. So patience, I guess, for everybody. Now that leads us to the third group, and whether we will see record applications in a year ahead. I mean, let's remember that, of course, certainly for the top US schools, there were already concerns about visas, in that case, the H-1B visas, that contributed perhaps to a decline in application volumes in the last 2 or 3 years across the board. What do you think we will see? Caroline, I'm going to start with you, because we have both INSEAD's class start in January 2021, which is you know, coming very soon. And then as we look at the 2021-2022 cycle for all of those top US schools. So perhaps, Caroline, you can, you know, share what your perspectives are for volume at schools like INSEAD for the next 12 months?
Yeah, so I think there's going to be an increase in applications for all of the schools, and application volume is always cyclical, and it's somewhat counter-cyclical to the economy. So in times of economic uncertainty or an economic downturn, there's always an increase in application volume. So what happens is, you'll have a lot of people applying at the start of a downturn, but if a downturn continues for a long time, then application volume can really tail off. So essentially what's happening is, anyone who is thinking about maybe doing an MBA in the next couple of years, a lot of those people will all apply at once, right? So you're pulling forward some of your pipeline to one point in time. And also, other people throwing their hat in the ring who might not otherwise have applied and, were perfectly happy with their careers, but suddenly they've been laid off and start to think about business school, might not otherwise have done that. So I think there's going to be, quite a dramatic increase in volume over the next few months, and probably for those classes that you've mentioned. And perhaps 12 months down the line, that will start to peter off. But I think it's going to be a very busy year for the admissions offices.
Right. I mean, even outside of these bigger cycles and financial crises, we've already seen, what was it, about 4 years ago, when oil, the price of a barrel of oil crashed. The majors, the likes of Schlumberger and others, were very quick to lay off staff. Judith, perhaps also to speak to this idea that if you're laid off, the aviation industry has stopped flying, hotels and tourism has ground to a halt. Schools understand those wider circumstances.
Very much so. And I think that schools understand, as you said, that, you have a professional background and a history, and it's not your fault. You didn't get laid off or let go or for any fault of your own. It was totally out of your control. I think what the schools do care about is what you do in the meantime. So in the time that you've been unemployed, are you taking classes online, as Bill suggested? Are you teaching yourself some kind of computer coding? Are you doing other things? And I know this is really hard to do from your house or your apartment, but to really continue to educate yourself so that when you do apply, that shows up on your resume. The worst thing would be this 6 or 8 month gap with absolutely nothing, because really learning from home is not that hard to do. If that's something that you chose that you wanted to participate in, or really even volunteering, if you were on a hotline or talking to seniors once a week, or, there's so many other ways. And we're all seeing this come to fruition now. People are getting pretty creative. And so what I wanted to suggest was that it's certainly understandable why you may have a gap, but I would say for your own mental health and for your own application health, to think of ways that you can continue to poise your candidacy for when you eventually do apply. Last week was full of these kinds of calls. Again, as Matt mentioned, there are certain industries, obviously, that are being hit much quicker than others.
Right. And Bill, with our colleagues at Fortuna, we often talk about, in the admissions process, looking for patterns of behavior. And as Judith said, whether it's that curiosity, well, if I have this time at home, I'll learn a new language or I'll learn coding skills. But this idea of having impact, if there are virtual volunteer roles that you could play, schools love to see how you've responded to a challenge.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one of the things that even prior to this issue, we would work with candidates on, is how did you deal with a challenge? Many schools ask that in their application question. Tell me about a challenge and how you overcame it. They're going to be looking for the same thing here. And regardless of whether you've been laid off, I mean, certainly the schools will understand why that might have happened, but they'll be very curious as to how did you handle it? What did you do? And what sets you apart from other candidates who are in similar situations? So it's still a matter of, how do I tell the right story? How do I indicate to an admissions committee the skills and the backgrounds and the personality that I have, whether that's high power academics or intellectual curiosity or the ability to marshal resources or my community involvement. All of those things can be demonstrated even in this difficult time. The other thing I want to point out, though, in terms of the cyclicality of the application process, what Caroline was saying is absolutely true for full-time programs. Typically in a downturn, applications go up. Not so true for part-time programs. So if there are any candidates out there possibly considering a part-time part-time programs are often counter-cyclical to the full-time program. So in bad times, people are a little wary about going back to school and signaling to their employer that maybe they think about something else. So applications are likely to go down for the part-time programs at places like Booth or Kellogg or some of the top schools that have evening or weekend programs. So if that's a possible consideration for you, you might explore that a little bit.
Right. Well, of course, for all of these questions and any others, already the candid assessment, you have the details to contact Fortuna to talk to our team about your current situation, your profile, your business school plans, whether now is the right time to throwing your hat into the ring for round 3 or looking at applications for the year ahead. I mean, certainly from what the 3 of you have been saying, and if history is a guide for us, we will see a jump in application volume. But those characteristics, I mean, Caroline, it's still that the things that would have helped you to stand out last year, as you carry those forward to stand out next year, they want to see thoughtful, alert, curious, engaged individuals. And those are the rules of admissions success, right? Absolutely.
Yeah, the criteria will still stand. And as Judith said, often candidates are very worried about how it will look if they're applying to business school, if they're not currently employed, or, perhaps they got laid off and they got another job, but, it wasn't an ideal situation. Perhaps they'd only spent 6 months in a position and then they moved on. And does it look like they're a job hopper, which, is something that admissions committees are sometimes not crazy about. So, admissions teams understand that circumstances are difficult and you might not have had your dream career path pre-MBA, and that's not your fault. And so, they're human, they understand, they're forgiving. And I would just, encourage candidates to explain what happens. Sometimes the admissions office, I saw that many times, the admissions director, that there was something, candidates may have a gap in their resume or something had happened and they hadn't explained it to the, they were kind of hoping that the file reader might not notice. And, they do notice, right? They're very experienced at picking up on anomalies in the application. And so just address it up front. It's always better to just, be open, explain things, and expect that the school will be understanding, because they will. It's much better than sort of trying to sweep an issue under the carpet and pretend it didn't happen.
Right. Now, we've covered a lot, and we have a wide range of questions. We've talked about deferral and the challenges that will face in the coming months. So this is now the quick fire round of the game show. And I'm going to draw from some of those questions that we received ahead of time, or those that continue to come in, and grab the question if you feel that you've got the right answer. Nobody has a buzzer, but Zoom rules apply. Starting with a senior in college, and of course this is the case for many undergraduate programs, that they're moving to a pass or no pass system in terms of any letter grades for that final semester. Maybe you were counting on an A in your final courses to nudge you up to a 3.5. Should candidates be taking pass, no pass options? I mean, Judith, are schools going to look at transcripts that end in the summer of 2020 with a level of understanding and forgiveness?
Yeah, I think, and I work a lot with 2+2 and deferred entry candidates. I think that MBA programs are going to be very understanding. I personally would tell you that if it was a quant class, I would probably still take it for a grade. I mean, that's just my predilection. But if it's a class that is not necessarily going to be related to your business school journey, I think that a pass-fail is fine. I think that it's a difficult time, and schools are certainly going to understand that. I would also tell you that don't be worried if your school's offering pass-fail and another school isn't. There's not a universal fix for this. So it may be that your undergrad is like, yeah, this is what we're going to do, and other schools don't agree. Anything, as Caroline said, that you feel warrants attention, discussion, please put that in your optional essay. I know this is a quick answer, but that's what I would say.
And Caroline, for you, a GMAT question. Someone who got a 680 felt that they could have nudged their score higher for INSEAD, but obviously not currently able to take that test. I know that INSEAD looks at breakdowns on a score, but again, does it make sense to use the old score that they have of a 680? Let's assume that the quant is close to that 70th percentile minimum that INSEAD likes to see.
Right. Yeah. So as you say, Matt, I mean, INSEAD looks more at the breakdown than the total. So they like to see a threshold of around 70th percentile or above on both the quant and the verbal. So it depends on the breakdown. But and I guess it also depends whether you plan to take the test again or not. And you can, if you're planning to take it again, or you're open to taking it again, if the school wants you to, then just make that very clear to the school. Either in that optional essay that Judith mentioned, or, email your admissions officer. So look, the schools are trying to be flexible. They're in uncharted territory here. They understand that, candidates are probably going to be submitting applications with, either without test scores or with test scores that they're not 100% happy with. And they'll be looking at, the other metrics that we've mentioned. And some schools will be making conditional offers. LBS has said, I believe, that they will make conditional offers to candidates, and so that if they're not completely convinced by your GMAT or your GRE, they will ask you to retake it when that becomes a possibility.
Now, the spring usually brings cherry blossom, but it also brings admit weekends. These are all going to have to be virtual. And any advice for getting the most out of an admit weekend if it's all going to take place online?
Well, I would say take advantage of whatever the schools are going to offer. And I imagine each of the schools is going to have a different format for their admit weekends online. My daughter, who is a first year at Kellogg, was one of the organizers of their admit weekend, and it is completely going online. And she'll be involved in kind of some panel discussions and things like that. So take part, learn what you can, make connections where possible. And if schools may have opportunities for you to interact directly with current students or alumni as part of these events, and I would take advantage of those. Get to know as many people as you can, learn what you can about the school, gain their insights as to how the school is handling the crisis, and that may have an impact on your decision process as well.
Well, we know this is true of your daughter, Bill, of what a resourceful bunch MBA students are, and it's in times like this that I think that we'll really see some great initiatives from the schools, from their students to reach out. So I'm going to wrap this up perhaps with one of the biggest questions of all. Earlier today, the International Olympic Committee agreed with the Japanese hosts that the Olympics of 2020 would actually take place in 2021, and I think that there are other
I didn't realize they decided to do that. That is a newsflash for me.
It's going to be pushed back. We'd need athletes if we're going to have an Olympics. So the other question is, the three of you, is there any chance that the fall 2020 will be pushed back? Will schools consider starting later in the year, maybe even starting in January, or is that just like an oil tanker trying to turn it around? That's a very complicated proposition.
I think to some degree, I'll jump in here real quick. I think that's possible. It's not a non-zero probability, but I think it's easier for some schools than for others. So for example, a quarter-based school like Booth or Kellogg or a couple of others could very easily say, we're not going to do the fall quarter, but oh, by the way, we're going to expect that you'll take classes in the summer quarter next year. Mm-hmm. A semester school, I think, has more difficulty doing that, but possibly. I don't think it's likely, but perhaps.
Impossible. Yeah. Well, I remind everyone that's joined us and the huge number of participants in the panel that, of course, you're sharing this webinar with three gatekeepers. These individuals were the senior staff. They were the associate deans. They were the admissions directors that, of course, had you still been working at your wonderful business schools, you'd be having all of these conversations and facing these challenges. Right now, our focus is to support the challenges of all of you that are either in the process of applying or thinking about applying to business school in the year ahead. So please do reach out to us. We take a lot of time for the free consultations that we give. We review those resumes, questions that you've submitted ahead of time so that we can really try to answer your questions and give you the best possible insider guidance. So you can sign up for one of those on Fortuna's website. We hope that this was useful. There may be one or two questions that we missed, or perhaps questions that you'd now like to submit for the panel and the rest of the Fortuna team to consider. But Caroline, Judith, Bill, in such uncertain times, thank you for providing such clarity and guidance and sharing this webinar with us.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks,
for
Matt. Good
joining.
luck to everyone.
Thanks so much. We'll see you guys soon. Take care.